Miscalculation, the belief that the weak will stay weak, and the belief that fear will keep its victims motionless are all conditions that allow violence to flourish. That belief was the foundation of Zane Walker's and his crew's reputation. They saw nothing but an opportunity, an easy victim, a lady who was helpless and defenseless, and a pregnant woman who refused to defend herself when they saw Lily Brooks, alone and pregnant, exiting a corner store on a calm afternoon. The battle they were going to start was something they failed to see. Because, actually, Lily Brooks wasn't alone. Her husband, Jason Brooks, a former Army Ranger who was trained to neutralize dangers before they realized they existed, was the man they were oblivious to and who was pursuing them. Jason's instincts had never dulled, even if he had abandoned warfare. The city they controlled would be gone by the time Zane and his men understood who they were up against. Please let us know where you are watching from and remember to subscribe before we continue. As the late afternoon sun began to set and create long, golden streaks over the busy city streets, Lily Brooks blinked against it as she left the clinic. Even though it was still warm, there was a touch of dusk in the crispness of the air, the subtle smell of exhaust mingled with the aroma of street food from a nearby cellar, and the steady buzz of traffic blended with the distant voices of walkers. The physician had confirmed 30 weeks. Her baby was healthy, growing as predicted, moving more every day, and had a stable heartbeat. Her chest constricted with expectation and relief at the thought. She would soon have a child with Jason. She felt the flutter of life inside her as she ran delicate fingers over the curvature of her stomach. Already anticipating Jason's response, she let out a breath and adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder. He would feel overjoyed, perhaps even a touch arrogant. In her mind, she could already hear his rich, playful voice referring to her as his warrior queen and urging her to relax. Since the pregnancy, his protectiveness had only gotten worse, and she shook her head and grinned to herself, constantly watching and fretting. During his years in the service, Jason had witnessed too much. Too much loss, too much bloodshed. It had refined his instincts and hardened him. He had no faith in the outside world, not even in their own community. He wasn't mistaken either. As she moved, Lily's eyes darted around. Because of the sun's low angle, shadows were stretched across the pavement, warping features and adding an air of uncertainty. Teenagers were gathered on a porch, laughing loudly and uncontrollably, and one of them was taking a pull from a cigarette before passing it on. Outside a liquor store, two men in dark hoodies were leaning against the wall and talking in low, thoughtful voices. She avoided to look into their eyes, but they followed her as she went by. At the curb, an automobile with tinted windows sat idle, the loud hum of its engine almost drowned out by the din of the city. After a moment of hesitation, it rolled ahead slowly and deliberately. Her fingers clenched on her purse's strap. It was home, but it wasn't the best area of town. Her entire life, it had been her home. She was raised here, attended a nearby primary school, and currently works as a teacher. She was familiar with the rhythm, the hazards, and the comforts of these streets. Jason consistently claimed that the city had changed, that it was no longer secure, and that it wasn't the same as she recalled. He was seasoned, not paranoid. Lily, however, chose not to live in dread. She was going to do this stroll 100 times more than she had before. The worn-out open sign flickered slightly in the window as she walked toward the small corner store at the end of the block, her sneakers padding softly on the cracked pavement. As she entered, the familiar aroma of aged wood, spices, and a hint of sweetness welcomed her. Nestled between a barbershop and a laundromat, both of which were closed for the day, the small store had been there for decades. She arrived as the bell above the door struck its accustomed ding. The shelves were stacked with everything from dusty bottles of imported soda to canned soup, and the short aisles were crammed to the brim with merchandise. The proprietor of the store, Mr. Kapoor, looked up from behind the counter, adjusting his reading spectacles and setting down a little radio he had been tinkering with. A courteous smile marred his warm, wrinkly cheeks. "Mrs. Brooks, good afternoon. You're a bit late leaving." When he saw her alone in the evening, his voice, thick with a lingering accent, contained the same mixture of interest and worry that it always did. The doctor's appointment took a long time, she said, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. She picked up a little pack of crackers from a neighboring rack, the cool air tickling her skin. Mr. Kapoor nodded but said nothing more, just walking home now. For a few moments, he paused, maintaining a precisely neutral demeanor. Lily caught the fleeting but intentional movement of his eyes toward the window. There was nothing to be concerned about. Nevertheless, she felt a slight shiver of discomfort go up her spine as she gave him some crumpled notes. The bell above the door chimed once more as she left the store, tucking her little bag under her arm. Outside, the late afternoon sun had set, illuminating the streets with amber and gold hues and creating long, slack shadows that resembled reaching fingers on the pavement. Between the peaceful expectation of darkness and the lingering warmth of daylight, the city appeared to pause. Although the streets weren't completely deserted, there was a subtle quietness, a change in rhythm, and a stillness that she hadn't previously detected in the air. She took a moment to look up. Rather, she maintained a constant pace, her own heartbeat matched by the steady tapping of her sneakers on the sidewalk. After only a few more blocks to her house, she sensed a presence, the nagging, innate knowledge that someone was seeing her. A group of men loitered across the street, their bodies engulfed by the growing shadows, close to the boarded-up laundromat. Maybe 4 or 5. They were just waiting, standing there without saying anything. Despite the residual warmth in the air, one of them, a tall man with a shaved head and a heavy jacket, leaned idly against the wall and flicked open a lighter. His keen features were briefly lighted by the tiny flame, which then vanished, returning his face to obscurity. Lily's gut nodded as the others stood in the waning light, their stances relaxed yet strategic, their gazes clearly focused on her. Ignoring the tight coil of uneasiness twisting in her chest, she continued to walk while her fingers tightened on the strap of her purse. This was nothing new to her. Catcalls, prolonged gazes, and the burden of unwelcome eyes pursuing her everywhere she went. She had mastered the art of dismissing it, maintaining her composure, and walking with intention. This was no exception. Correct? As soon as she crossed an alleyway, a figure appeared. Walker, Zane Ghost. It wasn't necessary for her to know his name. His steady, self-assured movements gave the impression that he owned the city and everything in it, including the area she occupied. The fading light caught on the sharp angles of his face as the late afternoon sun cast long, warped shadows across the sidewalk. Under the dark hoodie he wore, his body was slender but sturdy, his complexion was smooth, and his features were sharp. Although he had his hands in his pockets, this was no casual position. It was deliberate and under control. His face was polished and well-practiced, but it was his smile and the comfortable, gradual curve of his lips that made her body tense. The smile of a predator, piercing, pleased, confident. "Hold on now, my love." With silver rings on his fingers that captured the rest of the daylight, Zane Ghost Walker raised a hand as if he were stopping traffic. Like he had all the time in the world, his voice was fluid and leisurely, as if he already knew how this would end. "To whither are you hurrying?" Lily continued to walk without acknowledging him. "Don't interact, keep on going." However, the shadows changed as she moved further, and 2 more individuals emerged from the shadows of the alley. Her pulse jumped, imprisoned as they moved in from either side. With his hands in his pockets and an easy yet commanding attitude, Zane took a languid step forward. "Come on now," he added, his tone shifting to one that was almost light-hearted. "Nearly. Can't you say hello?" Lily forced herself to maintain a neutral expression as she finally looked him in the eye. "Don't be afraid. Refrain from giving him anything," she said calmly. "I'm just trying to get home." Zane shook his head and clicked his tongue as if she had let him down. "You appear to have all the time in the world, which explains why." The other men laughed, low and knowing, behind him. A wiry man with a gold tooth smirked as he observed her, while another, a broad-shouldered man with a scar over his chin, cracked his knuckles. Lily's jaw tightened. Be calm. Remain composed. She inhaled deeply. She would lose if she panicked. With caution, she shifted her purse against her hip and murmured, I don't want any trouble. There was a brief moment of realization as Zane's eyes shifted to her stomach. Then laughter. Zane shook his head and whistled softly, as if he had discovered something truly fascinating. Pulling at his lips, the smirk grew more intense. He seemed to be enjoying a secret joke as the corners of his mouth curled. You're carrying. Slowly and deliberately, as if he had endless time, he took a step closer. It was close enough for Lily to smell the cologne and smokes. Inexpensive. Sharp. The air between them became tight, filled with an unsaid challenge, and he clung to his sweatshirt like a second skin. How far along is she? Lily tensed. Don't respond. Don't participate. It doesn't matter, she stated in a firm voice. Zane laughed, her laughter full of laughter, even as her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Yes, but it does. He tilted his head, assessing her as if she were a jigsaw he was putting together, his eyes gleaming. You see. It's late in the day, and you're out here by yourself, wandering as if you have no cares at all. His grin got bigger. All danger, all teeth. That's either foolish or bold. The man in his immediate vicinity moved in a subtle yet oppressive way. A tightening of the noose. Lily's throat became parched. There was no robbery here. There was more to this. As she looked toward the street, the golden haze of the setting sun, and the far-off rumble of a passing car, her heart raced. The pavement was covered in deep shadows as the daylight quickly faded. They were still out. Outside a corner store, a man was rummaging in a paper bag. A block distant, a woman wheeled a stroller. Children were riding bikes, and there was a faint sound of giggling. However, nobody was approaching. Zane's voice smoothed into something almost personal as he came closer. Nearly. I bet your man isn't familiar with you in this state. Lily forced herself to look into his eyes despite swallowing forcefully and feeling her pulse pound against her ribs. Remain steady. Keep your eyes open. Keep it hidden from them. This is not something you want to do. Something dark and effortless filled Zane's smile as it grew wider and his teeth flashed. Joking. I'm amused. Yes, I believe we do. One of his men, the wide, wall-like one with the scar over his jawline, laughed under his breath behind her. A deep, anticipation-infused, knowing sound. This was fun for them. The strength. The terror. Lily's thoughts were racing. Consider. 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 The distant sounds of the street were drowned out by the pounding of her heart, which she could hear in her ears. Muscles tensed as her fingers twitched toward her phone. However, Zane saw the motion. Too sharp. Too fast. Similar to a predator snagging a rabbit's tail flick. Oh no, dear. His tone shifted to one that was almost delighted as he'd sked. Nearly. He extended his hand. Quick. Too quickly. Her wrist was scarcely touched by his fingertips. For a brief moment, Lily wrenched her arm back as she jerked away, gasping for air. Quiet. Zane's pleasure turned to something darker as his face darkened and his jaw tightened. Irritation. Manage sliding. Everything changed at that point. The atmosphere changed. Unquestionable but subtle. Not merely being there. Not only the eyes. There was a visitor. Before she ever turned, Lily knew. A voice. Lethal and low. Like a gunshot, it pierced the silence of the late afternoon. Please don't touch my wife. Zane stopped. His soldiers tensed, their stances abruptly changing from relaxed to attentive. Hunted. Lily let out a breath, and for the first time, her whole body relaxed. Malik. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, and he stood a few steps away, feet shoulder-width apart. His presence, however, was far from inconspicuous. Coiled. Managed. Unreadable. Unlike Zane's boys, who were broad-shouldered and muscular, Malik Brooks was not a huge man. He didn't have to be, though. The way he carried himself was his strength. The quiet assurance. The lack of fear. His dark eyes swept over the landscape. Hurry. Making calculations. Capturing dangers in a matter of seconds. 4 males. In front is Zane. Lily is flanked by 2. One lurking close to the opening of the alley. Placing strategically. A trap. Oh no. Zane's smile remained unwavering. It was wider, if anything. Like a wolf that has discovered a new game to play, his teeth were gleaming. Is this him? The father of the child? There was a giggle among the staff. Lo. I'm amused. A joke that was shared at Malik's expense. Malik remained still. He paid them no attention at all. He fixed his gaze on Lily. Are you all right? With a firm voice, she said, I'm fine. She was familiar with him, though. What he heard beneath it, she knew. The constriction. She couldn't quite conceal the edge of panic. Malik let his breath out through his nose. Slow. Measured. Be calm. Making calculations. He did not stiffen his shoulders. He remained in the same position. However, he altered in some way. A choice was made. He hadn't yet turned to face Zane. Rather, he stepped forward slowly and deliberately, putting himself between them and Lily. A shield. A caution. You can leave in 5 seconds. He spoke softly. Even. But last. A tone that was neither bluffing nor begging. Zane laughed at that. Something, isn't it? He looked at his boys and pondered. He was genuinely amused. But something else underneath it. A glimmer of interest. Testing. Weighing. We have a tough man. The tallest member of the team, Reese, stepped forward. The leather of his jacket creaked as he rolled his shoulders and murmured, Man thinks he can tell us what to do. He had large hands. Scarred. An excessive number of street fights caused knuckles to shatter. An aggressor. A fighter. The type that swung without any justification. It was caught by Lily. Malik's shoulders shifted. Tiny. Delicate. But it's obvious. He was prepared. Zane's smile never wavered as he cocked his head. Lazy. Taunting. Big man, do you really think you're frightening us? Malik did not even flinch. His face stayed composed. Unreadable. Managed. No. He sounded almost bored. Flat. I believe I'm alerting you. Zane whistled low at that. I'm amused. He chuckled to himself as he shook his head. You see. You're just making this enjoyable for me now. He was the first to move. Quick. He reached out and touched Malik's chest. Hurry. Testing. Intended to provoke. Malik remained still. Didn't recoil. Didn't flinch. Zane grinned. You're one of them, I see. Stay motionless and observe hard typefaces. Then he suddenly delivered the opening blow. It arrived quickly. A precise, well-practiced swing that was directly intended toward Malik's jaw. Malik, however, was quicker. The blow whiffing by an inch, he cocked his head just enough. And he struck in the same breath. Hurry. Accurate. Brutal. He released his right hand abruptly. Zane felt a bone-crunching blow to his throat. Zane choked and staggered back. Coughing. Shocked eyes. Lily saw a flash of movement as the second man lunged from the side. Quick. Careless. In a desperate situation. Like he had anticipated it, Malik pivoted with ease. His hand leaped up, twisted sharply, and grabbed the man's wrist in midair. A nauseating pop. The noise bounced from the walls of the alley. The man's face was twisted in pain as he slumped to the ground, holding his shattered arm and howling as his legs buckled. The next two hurried simultaneously. A huge error. Malik avoided the first, allowing the man to advance on his own strength. Unsteady. Open to the public. Malik delivered a clean, crushing elbow to the back of his skull in one motion. The lights are off. It swung violently, the second. An appropriate hook. Careless. In a panic. Malik hardly needed to respond. With fluid, controlled movements, he ducked and then slammed his knee into the man's ribs. Once. Twice. The man collapsed, hands gripping his side, and a hard, choking moan ripped from his throat. Lily hardly had time to take it all in. In a matter of seconds, four men were defeated. With eyes that flickered with something that looked uncannily like to terror, Zane staggered back and rubbed his throat. However, then, he took an unexpected action. He smiled. A predatory grin, slow and stretching. Okay. Zane's breath was still irregular, and he rasped, his voice scratchy from the blow. I'm intrigued now. Malik remained silent. He simply waited, watched, and allowed the silence to engulf him. Zane's amusement turned to something darker as he cracked his knuckles and twisted his shoulders. He didn't cancel his boys or run. He desired to engage in combat. Additionally, this time, he wasn't by himself. The opening of the alley darkened. Other figures appeared. Make a backup. This was not the end of it. Lily's stomach twisted. They weren't going to ignore this. Zane licked his lips and smiled, his eyes shining and his teeth catching the glimmer of streetlights. Second round. His voice was a low, derisive drawl as he teased. Malik let out a breath. Slow. Measured. He remained in the same position. Still under control. Still prepared. Lily, however, noticed it. The slight change in his eyes. He was bracing himself for anything. Zane was aware of it. The alley's heavy, oppressive air buzzed with tension. A moment that was as taut as a wire. Zane's shoulders rolled like a man entering a ring as he stood loose and relaxed. However, his eyes. He had eager eyes. When Malik dropped 3 of his soldiers to the ground, he didn't bat an eye. This was fun for him. You see. Zane whispered, his knuckles popping in the silence as he cracked them. Slow. Intentional. I have to use you as an example now. His voice had changed. I'm not kidding. Not amused. Colder. I can't let people believe that they can simply humiliate me in this way. Malik remained silent. Failed to meet the bait. He had no intention of proving anything. All he wanted was for Lily to leave. However, the following wave arrived the instant he moved, the instant he even turned to face her. 3 simultaneously. The first swung into action. A broad, careless right hook that was driven more by rage than ability. Malik's fingers locked like a vice on the man's wrist, catching it in midair. Malik twisted before the man realized his error. Hard. A stifled scream. The man's face flashed with pain. Malik then yuled him forward and slammed his forehead into his nose with vicious efficiency. A gruesome crack. Dark against the weak alley light, blood sprayed. Before his legs gave way and his body struck the pavement like a fallen weight, the man uttered a jumbled profanity. before Malik could reset, the second man lunged. Quick and low. A full-body tackle. Effect. The power rattled Malik's ribs as the momentum smashed them both into the rough brick wall. Lily's heart lurched as she gasped. Malik's side was burning, and he gritted his teeth. However, there was no time for recuperation. Since the third man was on his way. Stocky. Hefty. A fighter. A violent blow to the abdomen. Thud. The sound reverberated down the alley, and Lily winced. Malik took a deep breath to keep his core strong as he took the hit. He'd endured worse, but it still stung. Malik was the first to strike when the man reared back for another. Bone against bone, a severe elbow to the mouth. The man's knees buckled, his head twisted backward, and his balance wavered. With his muscles bulging and his fingers twisting in his collar, Malik turned and grabbed the second man, throwing him hard. In the middle of the fall, the bodies connected, tumbling onto the pavement in a tangled mass of curses and limbs. A sigh. There are two left standing. Reese and Zane. The final two people standing. Zane caught Reese's eye. His weight was shifting between his feet, and his stance had softened. "Hey, guy, what are we doing?" His voice had lost the confidence it had possessed only moments before. "I doubt it." Hesitancy. It wasn't as simple as it had been, but Zane grinned. His breathing was erratic, and the corner of his mouth was stained with blood. "Nothing has changed." Malik released the stress by rotating his shoulders and exhaling slowly and steadily. He had finished waiting. Reese paused. Zane didn't. He moved quickly. Too quick for a man with his build. Malik felt the searing ache of his first punch clipping his jaw. However, the second arrived before Malik could reset. Aiming for his ribs, it was low and accurate. A well-planned blow. Malik countered after blocking and taking the blow on his forearm. A vicious blow to Zane's sternum with an open palm. A good hit. Zane coughed and stumbled back, putting one hand to his chest out of habit. He had lost his sneer. His eyes fluttered for the first time. With something perilously near doubt, not with conceit. Malik made no hesitation. In a single stride, he closed the distance, caught Zane by the hoodie, and shoved him against the brick wall. The alley reverberated with the hit. The sound made Lily wince. With a moan, Zane jerked his head forward. Then he burst out laughing. Amused, harsh, and low. Coughing through the agony, he mumbled, "Damn. Okay, okay." Malik's hand tightened. "Are you finished?" Zane raised his head. And there it was, his bloodied visage displaying that slow, menacing smile once more. No. Then Reese was on the go. With white knuckles, he grabbed a glass bottle off the ground and swung it directly at Malik's skull. Lily let out a gasp. Malik, however, was quicker. Just as the bottle zipped past his head and broke on the brick wall behind him, Malik ducked, quickly and fluidly. Glass sprayed and fell in sharp fragments all over the pavement. Quickly and precisely, Malik turned and smashed his knee into Reese's stomach before he could recover. A vicious, piercing blow. Reese made a gasping, coughing sound as her breath caught. Arms wrapped around his midsection, he collapsed to the pavement, his body folding in on itself, knees falling beneath him. Lily's breath was irregular, her pulse a drum in her ears, and she gripped her purse tighter, her fingers digging into the leather. It was done. Or it ought to have been, anyway. Zane remained slouched against the wall, testing it, twisting his jaw, and idly wiping the blood from his split lip with one hand. His face was unreadable. Then he smiled. Slow. Simple. Risky. Is this really the end of it? Even with his scratchy voice, he maintained his unwavering confidence. You and your girl, huge man, I have people everywhere. He shook his head mockingly, almost amusedly, and whistled softly. You guys just set themselves up for failure. Jason remained silent and did not flinch or blink. Lily's voice was hardly audible above a whisper as she reached for him and touched his arm. Let's go, Malik. At first, he remained still. His breathing remained deep and steady, his muscles still coiled. To ensure Zane never got back up, his gut told him to complete this and terminate him right here. However, he was unable to. Not right now. Not in this manner. He clenched his jaw. He twitched his fingers. His entire being aspired to take action, to eliminate the danger. Rather, Jason forced the tension down with a steady breath. With a final, menacing gaze, he let go of Zane, his fingers relaxing, his body taking a controlled step back. Without saying another word, he walked Lily out of the alley while maintaining a firm but cautious grip. They didn't turn around. Zane shifted against the wall and coughed behind them. Then he spoke. Sharp. Out loud. Reverberating. It's not over yet. Do you hear me? We're coming for you. Malik tightened his hold on Lily's hand. He was aware. It wasn't over yet. It was just the start. Their apartment door slammed behind them, the sound ringing through the stillness like a last exclamation point to the mayhem of the night. Lily stood just inside, breathing unevenly and shallowly, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Her fingers curled so firmly around the strap of her purse that her knuckles became white as she held it to her chest. She was secure. They were secure. However, she didn't feel secure. Every nerve in her body was screaming that the danger was not past, and her skin was prickling. She was still trapped in the adrenaline aftershock. With a hefty click, Malik locked the door, bringing silence to the room. Then he ran it. Once. Twice. Looked through the peephole. Moved to the window on the side. His breath was steady but calculated, his mind moving in quick tactical steps. He remained extremely vigilant. Lily released her breath, but it was a shaky one. Too unsteady. As though to comfort herself, she raised a quivering hand and ran it lightly over the bulge of her abdomen, pressing her palm into the material of her blouse. Her voice faltered, breaking under the weight of all that was unsaid, I thought. She put a palm to her chest and paused. At last, Malik turned to face her. He spoke in a level tone. Too flat. Managed. You're okay. There was no question. It was an order. Definitely. Even though she wasn't feeling well, she nodded. Her gaze followed every tense line in his body as she examined him. The tightness in his jaw and the rigidity in his shoulders. As though he was still anticipating the next battle, the way his fingers curled and flexed at his sides. He wasn't merely standing. He was making calculations. Processing. Getting ready. Lily tightened her chest. Don't you think they'll stop? She inquired. Malik took a moment to respond. Since the truth was already known by both of them. He exhaled his breath slowly and deliberately. Don't be afraid. Without hesitation. Acceptance. Then he moved to the front. Rough, firm, and warm, his hands cupped her face, his thumbs barely grazing her cheeks. I refuse to allow them to touch you. A promise. A pledge. In his mind, the war was already won. Leaning onto him, Lily sought solace and assurance. I didn't ask that question. Although she spoke softly, the weight in her voice was obvious. Malik did not respond. Because he was not the type of man to make unfulfilled promises. Rather, he touched her forehead with his own. Grounding but brief contact. A reassurance in silence. A silent promise. Then he withdrew. And suddenly his whole attitude changed. It's wartime again. I must inspect the place. Lily tensed. We just got home, Malik. I won't go very far. He made his way to the bedroom. He moved with speed and accuracy. A soldier getting ready for combat. He opened one of the drawers. The block only, he whispered. Inside, fingers grazed the chilly steel. If they followed us, I must know. Lily felt a knot in her stomach. A weight that sinks slowly. Do you believe they did? Malik remained silent. Which indicated that the answer was yes. Frustration clawing up her throat, Lily clenched her jaw. What the heck? She lost her temper. Are you simply going to venture out on your own? Malik made no hesitation. He went to the closet, took out the hefty little safe, and steadied his fingers to input the code. The latch opened with a click. Chilly metal. Dark steel. With a quick, rehearsed gesture, he retrieved his Glock, checked the magazine, and put it into his waistband. Without hesitation. Don't question it. He was not playing around. Lily's throat became parched. Not even when they quarreled over the baby's name had she ever seen him like this. Or when he became defensive when she rode the train by herself. This was not like the others. This wasn't being overly cautious. It was war. Malik's voice was kinder now, and he finally looked her in the eye. I'll be right back. Lily detested this. She detested everything about this. She was aware, however, that Malik was not a guy who could remain motionless in the face of danger. She simply nodded, her fingers tucked under her shirt's material and pushed against her stomach as though protecting the unborn child from something invisible. Take caution. The city was silent outside. Too silent. Malik walked along the sidewalk, his boots hardly making a sound. He looked at everything. Every shadow. Every parked automobile. Each window had a curtain that moved a bit too late. He was aware of how this operated. Zane had no intention of charging with loud, reckless, and flaming firearms. No, he intended to observe first. He was aiming to make Jason perspire and have him question when he would make his next move. Where? How? Malik walked the block twice, keeping a steady pace and being acutely aware of every movement and change in the atmosphere. No one, however, was following him. That did not imply that nobody was observing. A throat cleared close by as he glanced back toward the apartment. Low, purposeful. Jason slowed. Davis, Mr. With a cigarette hanging from his fingers and smoke curling in the faint streetlight, the elderly man was slouched on the stoop of his brownstone. He had wrinkles on his face from age and things he kept to himself. A former Marine. A man who has witnessed combat and survived. He has spent decades living on this block. He dragged on his cigarette without turning his head or looking up. Word gets around quickly, son, so I murmured and exhaled. A few steps away, Jason came to a halt. He knew what that meant without having to ask. Yeah, Jason replied. His tone was too relaxed. Davis nodded while continuing to look out at the street as if he were witnessing an unrealized event. The boys? They're coming. Malik's mouth clenched. He was aware of that beforehand. With embers dying against the sidewalk, Davis flicked his cigarette to the curb after taking another slow pull. Brooks, you should keep quiet. At this point, he gave him a serious glare. The little stiffness in Malik's stance, the quiet fire burning in his eyes, and his battered knuckles caught his attention. A guy prepared for combat. Davis shook his head and let out a sharp sigh from his nose. Did you irritate the wrong kind of man? Malik balled his hands into fists. My wife was touched by him. Davis gave a slow nod, as if he had been there before and understood. Then he let out a sigh. That doesn't alter the future. Malik didn't run, so he didn't answer. He was no longer alone, yet he didn't hide either. Lily. The infant. His top priority was them. Malik let out a breath and rolled his shoulders in an attempt to release the tension that was building up in his muscles. "Thank you for the heads up." Davis merely grunted. A knowing sound. "I'm not the only one who witnessed what transpired, am I right?" He gave his head a tap on the side. "Brooks, these young people have phones. They have mouths." Then it dawned on him. There was no need for Zane to search for them. He was aware already. Lily awoke the following morning to her phone vibrating on the nightstand. The silence was rattled by a subtle tremor. She narrowed her eyes at the screen. "Jasmine." She nearly didn't respond. "It's too early. Too exhausted." However, something in her stomach twisted. She couldn't ignore the instinct. She picked it up with a swipe. Jasmine's voice sounded like a gunshot as soon as she did. "Girl, Lily. Tell me that last night, Malik did not go and fight Zane Walker." Lily felt sick to her stomach. The covers wrapped around her legs as she sat up quickly. "How are you aware of that?" With a piercing sound coming from the speaker, Jasmine sneered. "How can I?" "Lily. The entire neighborhood is covered in it." There was a hint of hurry and desperation in her voice. "Zane isn't the kind to take a beating in silence, you know. His team is out for blood, and everyone is talking about how some guy touched him." Lily put a hand to her temple, pressing firmly as she tried to ward off the onset of a headache. What she feared most was coming to pass. She murmured, "Malik doesn't know yet." Jasmine responded right away. "It might be wise to inform him before someone else does." After hanging up, Lily pushed back the blankets, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed and untangling herself from the sheets, her heart racing. She had a short distance to cover. Malik was awake in the living room already. He sat at the dining table with his back straight, his shoulders rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes steely, and he was scrolling through his phone. He was aware. With her heart pounding against her ribs, Lily paused at the threshold. "Did you see?" Malik nodded while continuing to move his thumb slowly around the screen. "People are conversing." Lily's throat grew constricted. How awful. The answer was already known to her. She simply didn't want to listen to it. "How do we proceed?" she muttered. A tap on the door made them both halt before Jason could respond, and Lily's breath caught. Before his mind even registered the shiver of panic running up her spine, Malik was the first to move, his body going into defensive gear. He encircled the gun on the table with his hand. Fast and steady. With his shoulders set and every muscle in his body prepared, he tucked it beneath his waistband and walked to the door. He looked through the peephole. Then he let out a small sigh. Hale is here. Unaware that she was holding her breath, Lily released it. With his body still tight, Malik gripped the handle firmly as he unbolted the door and dragged it open. When Detective Marcus Hale entered, his typical worn suit was a little rumpled, and his tie was just loose enough to reveal how late he had been. In a single, well-practiced gaze, his piercing, perceptive eyes scanned the room, taking in everything. The scarcely touched coffee on the counter, Lily's stress, and Jason's posture. Then he focused on Malik. "A busy evening?" Hale arched a brow and said dryly. Malik did not flinch or blink. "What are you looking for?" With a groan, Hale ran a hand across his face, his features drawn with fatigue. "That's what I should ask you." Then he turned to Lily, his tone slightly lowering. "Are you all right?" Lily gave a non-convincing nod. Hale saw through it all. With a sigh, Hale shifted his weight and looked from one to the other. "Let's get right to the point, as I don't have all day. Half the freaking city, including myself, is aware of what transpired last night." There was something else underneath the frustrated edge in his voice. Worry. Zane isn't the kind of person who takes a loss well or lets it go unnoticed. Malik folded his arms across his chest and rested against the wall. His eyes weren't relaxed, but his posture was. I'm capable of managing it. Hale's brows furrowed, and his face became stern. Yes. When they come for Lily, will you handle it yourself? Lily stiffened. When she's out by herself, when they come for you? With artful deflection, Hale's voice pressed against the room's tension. Brooks, do you believe this is a fair fight? Because it isn't. Malik knew that, and his jaw tightened. It wasn't any easier to hear, though, knowing it. Exasperation leaking into his actions, Hale wiped a hand down his face. Look, I understand, dude. You'd rather not run. You're not thinking long-term here, but you don't want to give up. His comments remained hard, but his voice softened somewhat. Zane has a large gang ready to follow him off a cliff, money, and connections. It's impossible to battle them all. Malik remained silent. What was there to say, after all? Hale shook his head and let out a breath. I have a spot for the two of you. Off the grid. I am the only one who knows it. You kept quiet. So that we have time to exert pressure on Zane's crew. Otherwise, you're making her a target. Quiet. Lily didn't even hesitate after that. We'll accept it. Malik's head jerked in her direction. He knitted his brows. Lily? No. Her tone was unwavering and forceful. Final. Unflinching, she looked him in the eye. I'm not going to argue with you about it. She seemed indifferent to the darkening of his eyes. She was more than just his spouse. Because of her pride, she refused to endanger their family when she was carrying his child. Lily swallowed, speaking in a softer but no less forceful tone. Please, Malik. His jaw muscle twitched. Malik eventually let out a breath, but it was one of grudging acceptance rather than rage. A measured, unhurried breath, letting go of the fight, letting go of control. For the time being, however. He faced Hale once again. When? With an inscrutable gaze, Hale nodded. This evening, Lily sagged with relief as the strain in her spine gradually subsided and her shoulders slightly relaxed. However, Malik only tightened his fists at his sides. Because he was aware that they were not safe when they left. It simply meant that the hunt was on. It was too quiet in the safe house. There was only the slight creak of the floors beneath their feet and the buzz of an old refrigerator in the corner, no traffic, no city noise. The cushions of the shabby couch sagged a little under Lily's weight. She tried to ignore the tight coil of tension pressing against her ribs as her hands, fingers spread wide, rested protectively over her belly and traced aimless circles across the fabric of her blouse. Despite being small, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, clean, safe, and hidden, the house was hardly equipped. It still didn't seem like home, though. Secure. At any rate, Hale had promised that. Lily wanted to think it was true. With the curtains shut and the slight hum of the outside world still piercing through, she looked toward the lone window. Muffled, far away, yet never completely gone. Being here, in a different area, far from their home and everything they knew, was strange. The room was too still, the walls too stark, and there was a silence that didn't calm. It was uneasy. On the other hand, Jason hadn't taken a seat at all since they got there. Jason trusted actions, not promises, so he proceeded through the home in deliberate, sharp sweeps, his body rigid, every movement focused and intentional, checking the locks, peeping through the blinds, and double-checking the exits again. Lily swallowed as she observed him and read every minute change in his posture. He moved with precision and control, but he was restless. He wasn't her spouse, and she hadn't seen him like this before. This was Soldier Jason, the man who had survived solely by instinct and who had been trained to foresee dangers before they materialized. She detested the fact that he had to be in this state right now, not abroad, not on a mission, but right here, in what should have been their haven. She whispered, "Jason," in a quiet voice that hardly broke the stillness. He continued to check the front door lock for the third time, shoulders stiff with unspent energy, fingers testing the bolt, without responding or even glancing at her. Lily bridged the distance between them and stood, her pulse settling. This time, Jason gave her a sharp, wary glance as if he were still somewhere else, still battling something she couldn't see. His jaw clenched as she added, "You need to sit down." Her tone was steady, measured, and cautious. "I'm all right." "No, you're not," she replied softly as her eyes swept over his, knowing rather than doubting. "You're wired to anticipate an attack at any moment." Jason's body remained tense as his eyes darted back to the window. "I am, that's why." Lily felt a knot in her stomach. He wasn't acting suspiciously. He was acting like Jason, the cautious man who had witnessed the consequences of letting your guard down. She took a step forward and grasped his hand, wrapping her fingers around it. Warm. Powerful. Tense. If it wasn't safe, Hale wouldn't have brought us here. With a slow, deliberate breath, Jason's chest rose and fell as he exhaled through his nostrils. "Not persuaded. There is no such thing as safe." When Zane was still out there, his voice was low, forceful, and unwavering. He was right, and Lily hated that she couldn't fight with it. Rather, she ground both of his fingers with a squeeze. "At least take a short break after that." She lowered her voice, begging. Jason's jaw ticked as though he were engaged in an internal conflict, and his lips formed a tight line for me. He then gave her the slightest nod after a long pause. Instead of sitting down, he put a solid arm around her and pulled her to his chest. For the first time in hours, Lily's body relaxed as she closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against his. However, the hunt had already started outside the safe house. Fingers tapping restlessly against the steering wheel, Reese sat in the front seat of the black SUV. His jaw was tense as his knee bounced. "This is becoming absurd, man." Sharp shadows were formed on Dante's face as he slouched in the passenger seat and examined his phone in the poor light. They vanished. Reese shook his head and scoffed. They didn't disappear. All they did was run. His jaw was clenched in impatience as his fingers pounded the steering wheel. Reese said, "I know that guy, but he hated waiting." He spoke in a confident, pompous tone. "He's not that intelligent." Dante smiled, "He'll surface, but it was a chilly calculation devoid of humor." When he does, Reese makes a sharp sound in the SUV's small cabin as he cracks his knuckles. "We complete it." They glanced at Zane, who was standing just outside the car with his hands in his pockets, still, quiet, and menacing. His face was unreadable. He stared along the deserted street, absorbing everything, making calculations. There was too much silence in the neighborhood. Zane was aware that Malik was hiding, but he had further knowledge. People tended to make mistakes out of fear. Zane turned to face Reese, moving slowly and deliberately, as if he had endless time. "Hit up his people, all of them. That aging vet down the block, his job, and his neighbors." "What is his name?" "Davis?" Reese took out his phone and nodded. Zane's eyes gleamed with something cold and merciless, and his sneer grew wider. "Yes, begin with him." Reese shook his head and laughed grimly. "He refuses to speak." Zane's smile didn't dim or even waver. "In one form or another, they all communicate." Malik snapped out of it. A quick breath, a burst of consciousness. He had fallen asleep without even realizing it. He sat up instantly, his head returning to full alertness and his muscles stiffening. He glanced in the direction of the window. He had been awakened by something. He walked over to the bedroom. Lily. Her breathing was calm and gentle, and she was still asleep, nestled up beneath the blankets with one hand over her abdomen. Excellent. With a steady heartbeat but a racing mind, Malik draped his legs over the couch and carefully pushed himself up. It was too quiet in the house. There was a strange feeling. He looked around the room, scrutinizing. The door. It's still locked. The windows. Safe. However, he was aware that looks were not always reliable. He shifted to the window's side and peered out while leaning against the wall. Nothing. Not a move. No people hiding in the shadows. Still, he couldn't shake the unpleasant feeling. Something in his gut told him. Malik also never disregarded his instincts. He was aware of how these things operated. They waited first. Then they looked. Then they surrounded it. He had previously been on the other side of this. The hunter had been him. He was the victim now. This implied that Zane will eventually discover them. Lily woke up the following morning as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds. She stretched and blinked, hoping to see Malik at her side. However, the bed was vacant. Eyes adjusting, she pulled up onto her elbows. There he was, already clothed, already awake, already keeping an eye on the window. Her heart fell. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, attempting to shake off the fatigue that was holding her down. "Have you slept at all?" Malik took a moment to respond. His body was too still, too stiff, and his eyes remained fixed on the window. Then, at last, "They are trying to find us." Lily's throat tightened with breath. Her heartbeat accelerated. "How are you aware?" With dark, unfathomable eyes, Malik turned to face her. "Since I would be." Lily felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't inquire as to his meaning. She was aware already. This was no longer only a street feud. It was a personal matter. And because it was personal, Zane would not give up until one of them was gone. The first sound occurred that night as the sky became darker outside the safe house. "There's a knock." Before Lily could respond, Malik was standing up. His body acted instinctively. He already had his revolver in his hand. Quiet. Steady. All set. As he approached the door, Lily held her breath. "Slow. Be cautious." Managed. With his heartbeat steady and his muscles taut, he looked through the peephole. His shoulders then relaxed. He unbolted the door just enough to pull it open. Hail the detective. On the opposite side, he stood aged and haggard, as if he hadn't slept for days. Sharp but exhausted. He had a somber face. Carefully, he closed the door behind him and walked inside. Then, just as Malik had anticipated, he said. "They located you." The safe house's atmosphere changed. Heavy. Tense. Suffocating. As soon as Hale closed the door, Lily sensed it. The fatigue. The discomfort. The encroaching certainty. It was no longer limited to Malik. It was all over now. Hale had a low, anxious voice that was tinged with something that even he couldn't hide. Worry. Zane's team is getting closer. The only fissure in Malik's otherwise unreadable face was the twitching of his fingers at his side. How near? Hale rubbed his jaw and let out a breath. When a man knows he's giving bad news, he takes a certain kind of breath. Near enough. A few blocks away, my guys stopped some of his people who were asking questions. "Brooks, someone has been observing. They're aware of your presence. They may not have the precise house, but they are getting closer." Lily felt her tummy tighten. Suddenly, the safe house's walls seemed smaller. More tightly. "How much time do we have?" With a firm voice, Malik asked. Hale wiped his face with his palm. "Weary. I'm frustrated. It might happen tonight. It might happen tomorrow. But it will happen." Malik's mouth clenched. "After that, we deal with it." Lily gasped with surprise. "Take care of it." As if it were that easy. Looking for something, she looked to Hale. A reassurance of some sort. A means of escape. An argument for not thinking this was inevitable. Are you unable to stop them? Hale's gaze grew softer. His silence was the solution, but only a little. With a forceful swallow, Lily covered her tummy with her hand for protection. What if we depart? Hale let out a sigh. They'll come after you. Then Lily sensed it. The walls are closing in. She had had enough of jogging. I was sick of waking up anywhere else than my house. I'm sick of waiting. Of keeping her breath in. Of having the impression that every moment was merely a countdown to the next nightmare. Malik faced her. His motions were deliberate. Intentional. I'll keep them away from you. He spoke in a soothing tone. Steady. Unalterable. However, his eyes. He had keen eyes. Chilly. Because escape was no longer on his mind. He considered putting an end to this before it worsened. In time for Zane to knock. Before Lily had to experience fear once more. The night dragged on. Tense and thick. Every nook and cranny of the little dwelling felt its weight. Malik sat close to the window, his outline hard against the faint streetlight glow outside. His fingers lightly tapping the wood, his rifle lay on the table next to him. Slow. Methodical. Awaiting. Malik didn't rely on Hale's promise to get back up after he left an hour ago. He had faith in himself. Lily didn't say much. As though preparing for a cold that only she could sense, she sat curled up on the couch with her arms firmly wrapped around her and her fingers pressed into her sides. Every time the wind rustled the curtains, her eyes darted to the window, and each change in the shadows made her breath catch. Then there was motion. Malik's back straightened, all the muscles tensing up. Before he even realized why, his fingers were encircling his gun. Instinct. There. On the other side of the street. There was a figure standing just outside the streetlight's wash. Not moving. Not talking. Simply observing. Zane's. As Lily followed Malik's gaze, her body went rigid and her breath caught. My gosh. Malik remained still. Didn't take a breath. Awaiting. Observing. Making calculations. The figure then shifted. It was toward the house next door, not them. Malik felt a knot in his stomach. Because he was aware that this was no longer merely recon. It was a matter of location. Malik said in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper, they're checking houses. Lily's breath came in short gasps. What? Her ears throbbed with her heartbeat. They have no idea which one we belong to. Malik spoke softly. Tight but measured. Managed. They're opening doors. The blood in Lily ran cold. From door to door. Examining each shadow. Each and every window. Each entryway. It was just a question of time. Malik got up. Without hesitation. Definitely. He was already heading for the rear door before Lily could even react. His cautious, silent steps. A trooper disappearing into the night. Before she had time to ponder, her body stumbled forward. Where are you heading? He continued. Didn't even slow down. To prevent this from beginning. She wrapped her fingers around his wrist. Close. In a desperate situation. Malik. No, we ought to remain indoors. They'll track us down. In any case. He spoke in a calm but decisive tone. Unalterable. I'm not going to wait for them to force the door to open. Lily felt her heart beating against her chest. Abrasive and demanding. On this, she wished to argue with him. Wished to urge him to remain. To spend time with her. To keep her safe here. However, she was aware. Malik would wait if he believed it was a choice. He wasn't waiting either. For a moment, her fingers tightened around his wrist. Then, gradually, she made herself relax. Malik made a snap decision. Didn't turn around. He slipped into the darkness and headed for the rear exit. And he was gone in an instant. Malik stayed in the shadows. His footsteps are light. Measured. With the quietness that only years of practice could provide, they moved. The scout continued to move. Inspecting porches. Looking through windows. Looking. Malik drew nearer. Measured. Accurate. Calculated. Then he hit. Malik closed the gap in an instant. Quiet. Quick. Deadly. He grabbed the scout by the back and pulled him off his feet, pulling him into the darkness of the alley. A gasp that was strangled. A battle. A thrashing of arms. Malik, however, was more powerful. More powerful. Quicker. More restrained. The collision sent a dull thud through the alley as he slammed the man against the wall. He pinned the man in place by pressing his forearm firmly over his throat. "Is there anyone else out here?" Malik whispered. He spoke softly. Easy. Risky. In an attempt to free himself, the man gasped and clawed at Malik's arm. "Screw you, man." Malik tightened his hold. Incorrect response. The body of the scout tensed. His gaze expanded and swept across Malik's face. Recognition. Knowledge. Recognizing. Fear. "You." With a rough voice, he croaked. "He's going to murder you, guy," Zane replied. Malik leaned forward and spoke in a cold tone. "Give him a chance." The man's gaze wavered. Malik saw it in them. "I doubt it." Hesitancy. Fear. "Is there anyone else out here?" Malik said it again, but with a colder tone. The man paused. Too long by a half-second. With more pressure, Malik dug his forearm into the man's windpipe, severing just enough air to cause his vision to become blurry. "I'll put you to sleep and find out myself in 5 seconds." The man's resistance slipped as he wheezed, his fingers shaking against Malik's arm. Fear. Fear. The knowledge that unless he spoke, he would not be able to leave this situation. "2 cars," he said raspily. "A few blocks away." Before they hit the home, Zane told them to wait for him. Malik's heart rate decreased. Excellent. There was still time, then. He didn't give the man another chance to speak. Didn't wait for a justification. A falsehood. An appeal. He punched him out cold in one smooth, crisp motion. With its head lolling forward and its limbs limp, the body sagged against the alley wall. Malik remained motionless over him. The expression is blank. A victory. Still more to come. Back toward the house he turned. With regard to Lily. Toward the important things. Arms encircling her stomach, fingers pushing protectively into the curve of her belly, Lily sat in the darkness. All the shadows were too long. All the creaks were extremely loud. With each change in the quiet, her heartbeat quickened. Malik was too long gone. Then there was a sound. Lily gasped for air. Steps. Directly outside the door. Before she heard it, she sensed it. The slightest pressure on the grip. Testing. Verifying. Looking. Lily's knuckles were white as her fingers sank into the couch. The rustle of motion. A pause. A hesitancy. The porch step creaked just a little. Then a low curse. Sharp. "I'm frustrated." The footsteps backed off. Lily held her breath. Remained motionless. Her ears rang from the silence that had been left behind as her heart banged into her ribs. The rear door then flew open. Malik entered, his presence already steadying, his gaze already scanning. Her whole body suddenly went under, and she sagged with relief. "They're close, Malik," he said, his voice pinched and tense. A chilly knot formed deep inside Lily's stomach as she focused. She hoped this would be over soon. That hail would fall. That they would manage to get out of this. Then she noticed it, though. The expression on Malik's face. Sharp. Unforgiving. Ready. This was not going to end. This was only the start. Now the safe house seemed smaller. More tightly. The walls are closing in. Suffocating. With her hands clutching her stomach, Lily sat at the edge of the couch with her knees bent. She wasn't trembling. Not quite yet. However, it was on the horizon. With his body coiled and taut like a spring ready to shatter, Malik stood by the window, prepared for battle. He kept his revolver close at hand, touching the table's edge every few minutes as if he wanted to assure himself it was there. His thoughts were elsewhere. Making plans. Making calculations. Hours had passed since he had removed Zane's scout. Since she had finally recognized that this was not going to end, he had returned to the house with a sharp, urgent voice and clipped, precise movements. Not until someone had passed away. What about Malik? He had no intention of waiting to be that someone. With her fists curling into the material of her shirt, Lily forced her voice to steady as she inhaled. "We must go." Malik remained still. Didn't recoil. Didn't initially even acknowledge her. She tightened her throat and swallowed. "Malik?" His voice was calm and low. Too regulated. "You were heard." Lily's fists clenched. "Then respond to me." At last he turned. His eyes were stern and his jaw was set. "We're not rushing." A bitter laugh caught in Lily's throat as she let out a quick exhale. "Naturally. Naturally. Malik. The soldier. Malik. The shield. Malik. The man who refused to give up when he should have." She took a step forward, her voice solid but raw and tremulous. "Malik. Pay attention to me. Pride doesn't matter to me. Making a point is not important to me. Our family is important to me. This matters to me." Her breath caught and her fingers trembled as she pointed to her stomach. "And you are important to me." His face grew softer. "Seldom. Lily." "No," she pushed from the couch, moving quickly, urgently, and desperately as she moved closer and closed the distance between them. "You are no longer a soldier. This isn't a combat zone." Malik's posture changed very little as his eyes darkened. "This is precisely that." Lily winced. The worst thing, not because she didn't agree. He was correct. She detested it. This seemed like battle, and I hated it. Hated that their future, her home, and her safety had become a battleground. She didn't have to accept Malik's refusal to go, though. Her voice was rough and straining with the weight of her dread as she murmured, "You don't get it. Malik, you're not alone in peril." Her chest tightened as her fingers pressed into her sides. "I'm not sure if you'll return each time you leave through that door and vanish into the night." Malik's hands clenched, but his face remained the same, unbroken, and unsoftened. Lily shook her head as the pain in her chest intensified and her throat burned. "I am no longer able to do this." Like a gunshot, the words rang out. Malik took a deep, steady breath, his jaw clenched, his chest rising. "Then what?" His tone was even and quiet, but not serene. "Do you wish to continue running? Stay hidden forever? Do you believe Zane will simply stop?" Lily's breath trembled. Her vision became hazy. "I'm not sure. She pushed forward even though her voice cracked. But I'm aware that we can't defeat them by ourselves. There was a long pause. Suffocatingly thick. Then. There's a knock. Lily winced. Before she could respond, Malik made a move. Shoulders stiffened, gun already in hand. All set. One more knock. Lighter and more recognizable. Calm down, a voice said as it entered the room. That's me, Lily said. Not enough relief. Malik didn't trust it, therefore he didn't lower his rifle. He waited, processed, and looked through the peephole. He finally unbolted the door after that. Jasmine. She dragged Lily into a close embrace after barely taking 2 steps. A girl. I've been going completely crazy. With her eyes burning and her throat shutting, Lily slumped against her. I agree. Jasmine drew away, absorbing her. You look terrible. Lily laughed briefly and without humor. Regards. Jasmine crossed her arms and turned to face Malik. As well as you. You honestly believed that I wouldn't show up if you simply vanished. Malik remained still. It was more secure. Jasmine laughed. Yes. How are things going with that? Lily let out a sigh. Jasmine. No, really. Jasmine turned back to her and interrupted. This cannot continue. The people of Zane. They're everywhere. They're attacking everyone. Inquiring about all of you. Concerning Malik. Lily felt nauseous. What did you say to them? Jasmine's expression became stern. What on earth do you suppose I told them? Malik kept a tight eye on her. Have you seen Zane? Jasmine paused. No. However, I have seen Reese. And believe me, Zane isn't far away if he's not. Lily touched her forehead with her hand. Jazz. Please. You have something, tell me. Anything. Jasmine let out a breath. I have a pal. A man he knows can help you two leave the city. Silently. Malik's mouth froze. No, he responded. Lily lost her temper. Malik, for heaven's sake. This is not resolved by running. He spoke in a harsh tone. Jasmine's expression grew gloomy. Death doesn't either. Quiet. Lily took a swallow. Simply consider it. Malik remained silent. Then there was another knock. Lily's body became extremely cold. Malik was aware of this knock, though. He was still holding his revolver. However, he didn't raise it this time. He pulled the door open. Detective Hale entered the room. Face glum. We have an issue. Hale didn't waste any time. Last night, we went to pick up a couple of Zane's boys. Believed we could put pressure on them. Malik's eyes became piercing. Hale sighed as well. They are not conversing. Lily buried her fingernails into her hands. What are we then expected to do? Hale gave Malik a glance. Before they do, we take action. Malik's head cocked. Do you have a specific idea in mind? Hale paused. Then he gave a nod. Yeah, he said. You won't like it, though. Lily's mind whirled. She was having trouble breathing. Malik and Hale were already conversing. Plan. Strategies. Counteractions. As if it were a war. She swallowed the nausea that was rising in her throat and put a palm to her stomach. She turned and left after that. Malik blinked. Lily? She continued. Didn't turn. Not until she was outdoors, drawing in breaths while her palms were pressed against the chilly metal railing. It was excessive. Before she could hear him, she could feel him. Malik's quiet voice. Speak to me. Lily closed her eyes tightly. Simply put, I'm not sure how much more I can handle. Malik touched her shoulder with his hand. I am aware. Her breath came out shakily. Then, Malik, stop it. Look for a method. Because this isn't how I can live. Malik froze. He paused for a long moment before nodding. Lily was also aware. Either way, this was going to end. The rifle was dismantled in front of Malik as he sat at the tiny dining table. Calmly, his hands moved precisely. Verifying. Cleaning. Putting everything back together. He was not in a hurry. There was no hesitancy. Lily was sitting in the armchair across the room, quietly observing him. She had expressed what she had to. Try to put an end to it. Malik had also gotten it. He was now preparing to do just that. He had no intention of losing the impending conflict. He started by taking inventory. He had a decent Glock. Tidy. Loaded. But it would take more than one rifle. Years ago, Hale told him that his life was finished and seized his military weaponry. At the time, Malik had concurred. Now, though, he needed all the advantage he could get now. After putting on his jacket, he got up. I will return. Lily's head jerked upward. Where are you heading? Obtaining what I require. She let out a breath. Malik. He took 3 steps across the room and knelt before her. I said I would protect you. I'll do it. She looked into his face. I take it you're actually going to do this? He didn't flinch. Indeed. Lily nodded after taking a deep breath. Then returned to me. He gave her hand a single squeeze. Always. Then he vanished. An ancient relationship was Malik's initial destination. He parked in front of a dilapidated car dealership. Weakly, the neon open sign flickered. Some things remained the same, but the city had altered. The air inside was heavy with the smell of metal and oil. A burly man in his 50s glanced up from a ledger behind the counter. Parker, Leon. Malik's face and then his injured knuckles caught the man's attention. He let out a sigh. I wanted to know when you would knock. Malik rested his head on the countertop. Do you need something from the rear? Leon tossed his pen aside and let out a breath through his nose. Figured. He looked in the direction of the garage door. Are you making me feel hot? Malik gave a headshake. You won't get it back. Leon looked at him for a while. He then grunted and reached beneath the counter, pressing a button. Near the rear, a secret door clicked open. Brooks, don't make me regret this. Malik remained silent. He simply entered. Car parts were not kept in Leon's rear room. It was a vault. Metal case-lined shelves. A tiny arsenal, concealed in plain view. Malik grabbed only what he required and moved according to muscle memory. Another Glock. Ready for a holster. Additional magazines. A knife for fighting. His favorite weapon for close quarters. A shotgun. Effective, but not subtle. He returned to the store after slinging the bag over his shoulder. Leon's eyebrows went up. I suppose this is more than just protection. Malik closed the bag with a zip. Neither confirmed nor denied. Leon let out a sigh. Do me a favor, then. Avoid being killed. Malik hesitated. Not part of the plan. Then he left. Malik did not return to the safe home by car. Not quite yet. He parked a few blocks away from Zane's domain instead. The battlefield needed to be selected. A battle zone was not what Malik desired. That would endanger Lily. He needed a regulated setting. Somewhere remote. Restricted means of escape. Zane would follow him somewhere. He was familiar with the location. A deserted warehouse on the city's west edge. Malik has been in more difficult situations abroad. The angles would be useful to him. The blind spots. Make their numbers meaningless. He had to entice Zane in first, though. And that? Bait would be needed for that. Malik took out his phone back at the safe home. As he entered, Lily sat up. "What did you do?" He didn't respond. Rather, he accessed a number he hadn't used in years by scrolling through his contacts. He pressed the call button. Once the line rang. Twice. Then. A voice. "Brooks, I assumed you were hiding." Malik grinned. "You wouldn't find me if I wanted to hide." Reese gave a gloomy laugh. "What is this, then? Are you prepared to confront the truth at last?" Malik rested his head on the table. Cool voice. Calculated. "I'm going to give Zane a chance. He and I. No crew. Only us." Reese hummed. "Why would he consent to it, too?" "Because I go hunting first if he doesn't." Quiet. Then a slow chuckle. "I take it you have a death wish?" Malik stopped grinning. "Let Zane know where we should meet. He just has one chance to complete this." One. Reese let out a breath. "Is it genuinely your intention to leave this situation?" Malik gave Lily a quick look. Then the phone again. "Indeed." He ended the call. Lily had a pallid face. "Malik. Just what did you do?" He looked her in the eye. "I simply concluded this." Malik placed his firearms on the table and looked through each magazine. Every safety. Before she spoke, he sensed Lily's presence. "Aren't you going all the way?" He looked in her direction. She wasn't in tears. She wasn't fracturing. She was afraid. Malik took a step forward and cupped her face. "This is over." Her breath caught. "What if it doesn't?" Malik remained still. Didn't think twice. "I don't return after that." Lily took a fast breath and held it. Bright eyes. At last, she gave a nod. Since she was aware. It was this. Stop running. Don't wait any longer. It would all be over tomorrow. In one way or another. The wind creaking softly through broken windows was the only sound in the warehouse. Malik walked carefully through the room, his boots crunching lightly on the floor that was covered with mud. It was here. It was large, but not overly so. There were piles of old shipping crates and rusted machinery everywhere, and shadows huddled in every corner, giving him enough cover for what he needed. His tactical thinking divided the room into blind spots, escape routes, kill zones, and zones as he inspected it once more. It was going to finish here. His battlefield. Malik prepared for hours. In the far corner, behind a pile of crates, was the shotgun, pointed at the main entrance. A contingency weapon. On his hip sat a Glock pistol, ready and loaded. Just in case, the other was hidden beneath a sheet of sheet metal close to the catwalk. The blade? He carried that with him. There would inevitably be close quarters. He tied a length of rope to the beam and adjusted a pulley system over one of the openings. A trap. Malik wasn't merely getting ready for battle. He was getting ready to triumph. The warehouse had turned into a battlefield by the time the sun went down. One that was only clear to him. A block from the warehouse, partially concealed by a rusty chain-link fence, Malik's truck was parked. He had ensured that it was sufficiently conspicuous to be located and pursued. After their previous chat, Reese's number was already blacklisted. Malik did not require verification. Zane would arrive. He would. Malik would be prepared when he did. Lily was quiet back at the safe house. Her mind was racing as she perched on the edge of the bed with her hands clasped over her stomach. She didn't know the specifics from Malik. Not every one of them. But she knew what was going to happen without their help. His hand had lingered on her cheek as he bid her farewell with a kiss. He had said, "I'll see you soon." She had also given a nod. Her resolve, however, broke now that she was alone in the silence, save for the heater's hum. Her cell rang on the bedside table. Jasmine was the one. After a moment of hesitation, Lily snatched it up. "Jasmine," she said in a tremulous voice. "I believe Malik will take action. Something from which he might not return." Jasmine's tone was piercing. "He's where?" Lily took a deep breath. "I'm not sure. He refused to inform me." Jasmine let out a huge sigh. "Listen to me, Lily. You must have faith in him." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Lily responded, "I do." Jasmine softened, "But I'm so scared. You know, he's not just doing this for himself. He is doing this for the baby and for you." Despite Jasmine's inability to see her, Lily nodded, "He's not going to let them win." Because she knew in her heart that Jasmine was correct. Zane flicked ash from his cigarette onto the street while leaning against the SUV's hood. His face was unreadable as he gazed off into the distance at the warehouse. "Is this the location?" Reese moved up next to him and inquired. Zane narrowed his eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes, he is this person." Reese looked from Zane to the building and back again. "Do you honestly believe that he is stupid enough to battle us alone?" Zane grinned. "Ignorant? No." He drew his cigarette once more. "But desperate?" Yes, 2 additional SUVs with buzzing motors were idling behind them. There were 9 males in all. This time, Zane wasn't taking any chances. Reese scowled. "Do you believe it to be a trap?" Zane crushed the cigarette beneath his boot after letting it fall. He turned and pointed to his soldiers, saying, "I don't care if it is. By night's end, he's dead, whichever way." With a smirk tugging at his lips, Reese nodded. "It's about time." Zane's smile grew as he turned to face the warehouse. "Let's go greet each other." Jason huddled in the warehouse's shadows, breathing steadily and slowly. The faint rumbling of motors and the scrape of tires on pavement were now audible to him. They were present. Outside the building, the SUVs stopped, their headlights piercing the darkness. As boots hit the floor and automobile doors opened, Jason remained motionless. He tallied 9 footsteps. The night was filled with Zane's voice. "Brooks." The noise bounced off the walls and reverberated throughout the warehouse. Jason remained still. With a sarcastic tone, Zane yelled again, "Come on out, big man. Didn't you want to meet in person?" Jason gripped the Glock more tightly. He didn't respond. Not quite yet. As Zane's crew approached the door, the sound of footsteps became more audible. Jason moved a little, taking up position behind a pile of boxes. He already knew their route by heart. Overconfident, they would underestimate him once more. And he would be waiting when they did. With his boots crunching on the dirt floor, Zane entered the warehouse first. His grin remained fixed as he looked around the room. "Brooks, where are you?" His voice echoed as he called. Already in hiding, Reese and the others spread out behind him, their guns at the ready. Their numbers gave them a sense of control, and they moved with assurance. However, Zane. This is what Zane was enjoying. Because this wasn't a fight to him. That was the end. The trap is prepared. Jason's finger touched the trigger as he let out a slow exhale. It was this. The quiet before the storm. The weight of the impending event and the tension in the air were palpable to him. And a small, icy smirk twisted Jason's lips as Zane and his team made their way farther into the warehouse. What awaited them was unknown to them. Zane and his crew were completely engulfed by the warehouse. As Zane's men moved beneath him, Jason remained still, crouching in the shadows of the top catwalk. They dispersed, moving with assurance, almost arrogance, as though they were doing a standard task. Amateurs. Their spotlights gleamed dimly across old machinery and containers, but they weren't searching with the keenness of seasoned hunters. They believed they would fail because Jason was besieged. The sound of Zane's voice echoed off the steel walls. "Brooks." Jason remained still. "Do you honestly believe that hiding will help you?" Zane made fun of it. "I gave you an out, man." Could have been quick, he laughed in a tone that was almost informal. "However, you intended to make this difficult." Jason held his Glock tighter, but he remained silent and waited. Zane's first man entered the kill zone, which was a pile of containers that Jason had constructed with a pulley system. Jason drew the rope from the darkness above as soon as he saw the man move into place. With a loud roar, the containers fell, striking the man squarely in the face. Before he could even yell, he was rendered unconscious by the hit. There was anarchy. "What the hell, yo?" Gun raised, Reese spun around and shouted. Zane's smile wavered just a little. "Calm down," he growled. "He is alone. He wants to frighten us." Panicked, another voice called out. "Dante is defeated." Zane's mouth clenched. "Disperse. Track him down." The second mistake. Silently, Jason approached the second trap along the catwalk. Split and conquer. That was the objective. Jason's next target was a pair of men attempting to navigate a warehouse corner together. Their nervousness was evident as they whispered to one another. Jason tugged another rope as they went beneath a loose beam. The first man was struck by the downward swinging beam, which sent him flying. The second man turned, surprised, but Jason fell softly behind him before he could respond. The barrel of the Glock slammed into the back of his head. Jason snarled, "Drop it." His firearm clattered to the ground as the man froze. Jason made no hesitation. He crumpled the man to the ground after striking him in the temple with the butt of his pistol. Another two down. As the noises of his soldiers being removed, one by one, reverberated throughout the warehouse, Zane stood in the center, his sneer finally breaking. "Brooks, this isn't funny anymore." His voice was tinged with rage as he yelled. No answer. He turned to his final lieutenant, Reese. "Do you see him?" Reese gripped his rifle tighter and shook his head. "No, dude. In here, he's like a ghost." Zane tightened his jaw and looked around at the darkness. More to himself than to others, he mumbled, "He's just one guy." He said, "He can't take all of us," but he knew it wasn't true. The next to fall was Reese. He didn't even anticipate it. He was attempting to cover Zane by backing up one moment. The next, Jason emerged from the darkness and crashed into him with unadulterated might. Reese threw wild blows as the two men struggled, but Jason's motions were more controlled and crisp. He dodged, countered, and then sent Reese tumbling after driving his knee into his ribs. Jason hit Reese on the side of the head, knocking him out before he could stand again. Zane's jaw tightened as he watched everything unfold, and then it was just the two of them. Jason's chest rose and fell slowly as he stood over Reese's lifeless body. He did not lift his Glock, but it was still in his hand. A slow, menacing smile formed across Zane's face as he tilted his head. "So this is what you wanted, huh?" he remarked in a low voice. "Me and you alone." Jason remained silent. Zane threw his weapon aside and laughed. "Okay, let's see what you have, Brooks." First to move, Zane sprang at Jason with unexpected force. Jason sidestepped the punch, delivering a scathing jab to Zane's ribs in return. Despite his grunt, Zane remained firm. He swung once more, striking Jason's jaw this time. Jason faltered a little, but his balance held. He struck Zane in the side of the head with a nasty elbow in retaliation. Each man delivered strong, painful strikes during the vicious battle. Zane fought nasty, grasping, gouging, and targeting for vulnerable spots, but Jason had the advantage due to his training. Zane once picked up a rusting pipe from the floor and swung it in Jason's direction. The pipe whistled by Jason's ear as he dodged in time. Zane was tackled to the ground as he charged forward. The impact of each blow reverberated throughout the warehouse as the two guys struggled, fists flying. Jason rolled to his feet when Zane successfully knocked him off balance. His smile had vanished, replaced by a more sinister one. Zane panted, "You're okay. I'll grant you that. You're bleeding, though. You're worn out. And me?" He extended his arms. "I've only just begun." Jason's look was icy as he wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. "Let's see." The brawl was far from over as the two men circled one another. The only sound in the warehouse was their breathing. With his ribs burning and his muscles hurting, Jason wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Zane's smile remained, but it had lost its arrogance. It was insane and wild. Zane rolled his shoulders and mocked Brooks, "You're slowing down. You're not benefiting from that military training anymore, are you?" Jason remained silent. He was evaluating. His body ached. Not good. Every breath was harsh, and his left side was rigid. Jason had been injured before, but Zane had delivered some good blows. He had fared worse. Jason almost avoided Zane's initial lunge, but the motion sent a jolt of pain through his ribs. Zane took note. Then Jason erred for the first time. He made a small but noticeable mistake. Zane took advantage of the situation and delivered a vicious kick to the ribs. Zane tackled Jason as he stumbled. Jason's back slammed against the chilly concrete as he struck the ground. With massive, bone-shaking strikes, Zane fell on top of him. Jason's vision was startled by the hit, but he made himself concentrate. Each hit gets harsher than the one before it. Now there was a deep, evil chuckle coming from Zane. "Tough dude, what's the ma? Tur. Did you think you would finish me?" Jason's arms weighed a lot. He was moving more slowly. Zane took hold of his collar, pulled him to his feet, and gave him a vicious knee to the stomach. Jason's body erupted in pain. Zane let him go and took a step back, breathing heavily but triumphantly. "That's all you have?" Zane scoffed. Jason's palm tightened into a fist on the floor after all that conversation. His vision became hazy. His ribs roared. He had weak muscles. Zane looked aside. Only a little. For a moment only. That was his error. Jason shifted. Quick. More quickly than his physique ought to have let. Zane had dropped the corroded pipe earlier, and he picked it up. Jason swung before Zane could even detect the movement. Zane's knee fractured against the pipe. Zane staggered back, shouting in agony. He lost his equilibrium. Enough, but not much. Jason forced himself to endure the agony. He rushed forward, shoving Zane against the catwalk's metal railing and pressing his shoulder into his chest. Both of them were shaken by the impact. As Zane's hands fumbled for a hold, Jason persisted. He struck him once more. Zane's body stumbled back this time. His legs hardly held as his back smacked against the railing. His eyes were filled with fear for the first time. Jason stood above him, panting. He had an unreadable face. Zane laughed shakily, still attempting to be indifferent. "You." He spat blood over the concrete as he coughed. "Do you believe that you and I are any different?" Jason looked down at him with a stern, cruel glare. Then at last he spoke something. "The distinction is." Jason gripped the pipe tighter. "I'm leaving this place." Then. He made one final swing. Zane's skull was struck on the side by the pipe. Zane fell. His body thudded sickeningly on the floor, motionless. It was done. For a considerable amount of time, Jason stood there with the pipe falling out of his hands and thumping to the ground. His breathing was labored and erratic. He had trembling hands. His ribs were a blazing mess, and his side was screaming. He was still upright, though. He pivoted, looking around the warehouse. Zane's crew was lying on the ground, some of them moaning, some of them comatose. Despite his accomplishment, he did not feel victorious. Just tired, no relief. He clutched his ribs as he stumbled toward the door. It felt like every step was more difficult. Then came the sirens in the distance. He raised his head. Salutations. The police were on their way. Jason let out a slow breath. Excellent. At last, it was over. Rather than go away, Jason retreated into the shadows close to the warehouse door. He had no intention of running. Not now. His pulse continued to pound, and his hole hurt. But with the revolver still in his hand, he remained vigilant. Just in case. 2 squad cars arrived after the first one drew up outside. The warehouse was awash with blue and red from their flashing lights. Jason saw Hale go with an unclear face. As they arrived, officers brandished their firearms and yelled commands at the gang members who had been killed. Jason signaled that he was not a threat by lowering his own rifle and slightly raising his hands. Hale's eyes fell upon him, darting from the damaged body of Jason to the still body of Zane. They were silent for a moment. Then Hale rubbed a hand down his face and groaned. "Brooks, Jesus Christ." Jason dry-throatedly gulped. Hale muttered something under his breath and shook his head, indicating to the closest police, "Told you I'd handle it. If someone is still breathing, cuff them. Make an ambulance call for those in need." A policeman cautiously walked up to Jason. "Are you armed?" With a nod, Jason handed over his Glock after carefully removing it from his waistband. "First, grab. No more." Hale's eyes narrowed. "I should take you in, don't you?" Jason grinned wearily. "No, you won't." There was a lengthy sigh from Hale. "I won't, damn it." At last, Jason opened his mouth to breathe, and he turned, shouting commands to his troops. It was finished. 3 months later, Jason was heading home after feeling the weight somewhat lessen for the first time in days. Except for the steady beep of the monitors and the rustle of blankets here and there, the hospital room was silent. Jason sat still on the chair next to the bed. The small bundle in his arms was softly touched by his fingers. She was so little. Her little chest rose and fell with each calm breath, her fingers delicate, her skin velvety. His daughter. His. Beside him, Lily stirred, her voice slurred. "You're looking at her once more." Jason didn't raise his gaze. He was unable to. He was so terrified that this moment would pass if he blinked. Lily grinned, looking gorgeous despite her fatigue. "As you know, she's not leaving." Jason gave a shaky sigh. "I am aware." But he wasn't afraid of that. The fact that he had almost lost this was what frightened him. His hand gripped the baby's blanket a little tighter. He had come home to violence. He had devoted years to escaping that existence and providing Lily with a regular, secure life. Nevertheless, it had ultimately located them. His hand had been forced. He had pondered if he had made the correct decision for a long time. If he had been any different from the men he vowed he wasn't like after meeting Zane on his terms. Then he turned to face his sleeping daughter. Lily was here, by his side, and she was here, safe and alive. All of a sudden, it was irrelevant. Because he had defended them when it mattered most. No regrets. Definitely. Only this. His household. Complete. Lily extended her hand and touched his fingertips. "She resembles you exactly." At last, Jason raised his head to meet her weary eyes. I hoped she would resemble you. Lily gave a little laugh. Jason grinned and said, give it time. But as soon as his gaze returned to the infant, it vanished. She is ideal. Lily's grin grew softer. She is, indeed. There was silence between them. It wasn't hefty, though. It was quiet for once. Jason touched his daughter's little fist. Lily kept a close eye on him as she naturally wrapped her fingers around him. Are you all right? Jason let out a breath. Yes. He meant it for the first time in a long time. Lily moved about in bed, shifting the pillows. A name is still required. Jason grinned. I believed we had a consensus. Lily's eyebrow went up. Do you mean when you attempted to give her a weapon-inspired name? Jason laughed. The name Serafina is powerful. Lily gave an eye roll. Jason, she's not a battle axe. Jason's smile persisted as he shook his head. Okay. What name would you like to give her? Lily paused. Then Naomi, quietly. Jason blinked. Like it belonged there, the name sank into his chest. Once more, he glanced down at Naomi Brooks, his daughter. Yes, that was correct. Jason bent down and kissed her small forehead. It's Naomi. The city outside went on. In the distance, sirens continued to cry out. Unsafe streets were nonetheless traversed by people. But none of that crossed Jason's mind in this room. The conflict was ended here, in this room, and the future was all that mattered. For Lily. For Naomi. For him. For his family, for whom he had battled and won. I hope the story was enjoyable to you. To ensure you don't miss the next one, kindly subscribe and share it with your friends. I've chosen 2 stories for you to read in the interim that I believe you will like. Enjoy your wonderful day.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.